what does it mean to be a good parent?
There's a lot of activities of parenthood that you assume you have to stand for, but you just really don't. Just don't stand up. Just find another way to do it.
Hey, it's Julie. Welcome to Uncomfy, a show about sticking with moments that challenge us even when they're uncomfortable. And I know you're probably wondering, why would anybody choose to be uncomfortable? But I know from personal experience, and you probably do too, that sometimes a little discomfort has benefits if we can stay open and curious about it. And that's what we're here to explore. So let's get uncomfy. Today, I'm joined by Jessica Slice. She's a disabled author. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Glamour, Cosmopolitan, and her latest book is a memoir. It's called Unfit Parent: A Disabled Mother Challenges an Inaccessible World. Jessica has 2 kids. Welcome. Thanks so much for being with me today.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Tell me about the title, Unfit Parent. Is that a label that you've had placed on you?
Not to my face. Though disabled people are declared unfit far more than non-disabled people, and often not because of particular actions, but because of the fact that we are disabled. And so I wanted to draw attention to that with the title. But I also wanted to do something else, which was, I think that most parents suspect that they may be unfit. I think we all carry around this worry that, like, what if I'm not good enough? What if I'm not doing this well enough? And so I also wanted the title to be like uniting, to kind of speak to that insecurity that parents have.
We need to know a little bit of your disability story, if we could. You were 28 when you became disabled. What is the nature of your disability?
Yes. So I'm 42 now. It's been 14 years. I have a genetic condition that impacts my connective tissue, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, but I didn't know I had that condition. And it can sometimes lead to a secondary neurological condition that impacts my body's ability to regulate heart rate, blood pressure, digestion, temperature. And for me, I was on a hike, I got overheated, and that episode of heat exhaustion triggered the secondary neurological condition. And then when my sister experienced something very similar, we were referred to a geneticist who is the one who diagnosed Ehlers-Danlos syndrome.
So what does that mean for your life? What is difficult for you because of your disability, because of these conditions?
I am always in pain. So every moment that I'm awake, I'm in pain. I experience a lot of nausea, dizziness, fatigue. There's almost not a part of my body that is impacted. My window of tolerance for almost any activity is much lower than it was before I was disabled. You know, I can stand for about 30 seconds before I start to lose consciousness. I can sit upright for about 5 minutes before I start to lose consciousness. So, you know, I'm doing this for like supported on a slightly reclined chair. And before I became disabled, before I got heat exhaustion, I was a runner. So I ran 7 miles every morning. I owned a business. I was an extremely busy and active person. So I think I was kind of on one end of the extreme pre-disability. And now I don't, know about the extreme of disability, but I certainly, as far as like activity level, I'm pretty low now.
When you were 28, at the time you didn't have children, so you were not yet a mother. Had you always planned to be a mother or hoped to be a mother?
No, I assumed I would not be a mom. And I used to tell people that it was because I didn't want kids to cramp my style, that I had this really fun and vibrant life and I didn't want it impacted. Um, but the truth was that I was such a perfectionist in my 20s and so hard on myself that I worried about treating a kid the way I treated myself. And so I had this like kind of secret fear of what I would do to a child if I was a parent. And then it was actually becoming disabled and the way it forced me to reckon with how I judged my own life, how I valued myself, all the ways that I sought perfectionism or perfection. It was really that made me reconsider if I wanted kids or not. So it was becoming disabled that made me want to be a parent.
Just tell me a little more about that. So becoming disabled forced you to, helped you to overcome your perfectionism? I mean, you just obviously couldn't run a perfect mile anymore, I guess.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and it also mostly it just made me sit around with myself. I was able to keep moving and keep striving and like try to outrun all my worst fears for so long. Almost literally. And then, it took me 2 years to get diagnosed and then another couple, there were all these years of waiting and a lot of physical discomfort. And during that time, I just kind of was stuck with myself and I had to get to know who I was. And through that, feel very lucky that what I discovered is that perfection isn't possible and that what I was left with, what I was left sitting with is good as I am without all of the things I had been trying to, going after before.
There's this really evocative line in your memoir where in 2014, when you say, I realized that I would likely be sick for the rest of my life. I had to come to terms with how much of my body and future will remain a mystery. It would take years to accept my new reality and to live within my physical boundaries. But once I did, I was surprised to find out that I was experiencing the joy and freedom that I had yearned for during my years of rabid achievement. It's so counterintuitive, but really eye-opening that passage was for me to think that with physical limitation, that it was in disability that you found the joy and freedom that you were seeking so actively in your able-bodied years.
Yeah. And two things with that. One, I don't want to imply that that's the only allowable response to disability. Some people don't experience that. Some people experience their life as much worse and much more painful through disability. I didn't. And I think something that really bothers me is there is an assumption that disability is tragedy, that a disabled life is a life that is deficient, is somehow worse than a non disabled life. And I think the thing I care so much about is that we should have the freedom and the space to determine how we judge our own lives and how we value our own lives so that there should be room for a story like mine, which is that I am happier disabled than I was when I wasn't disabled. And there's actually this philosophical phenomenon called the disability paradox, which is that disabled people are much more likely to be happy than non-disabled expect, and we're happy at equal to or greater levels than non-disabled people. So it's actually like borne out in research that disability does not equal a bad life, despite many assumptions to the contrary.
Another one of the really surprising conclusions you make and arguments you make in this book is that it was because of your disability that you were better equipped to handle the stress of new parenthood and to kind of be able to revel in some of those joys. So let's talk about getting to that moment. Once you decided that you maybe were open to having kids, that maybe you could be a fit mother, what were you concerned about, well, how am I going to care for a baby if I can't stand up and walk around? Like, how am I going to, the practicality of it, right?
So I'm currently working on my next book. And as I'm writing, I've been realizing that, I got sick in 2011. We became foster parents in 2017 or into 2016. And during that time, I had done so much problem solving because, when I got sick, Instacart really wasn't a thing and Amazon orders weren't really a thing. And so I had to figure out how to get food every day. If I went to the grocery store, I couldn't walk down the aisles. I could for a few seconds, and then I'd have to sit on the ground. And when I checked out at the grocery store, if there was anyone in line, I would have to scoot on the floor on my butt through the line. Every day was this like, how do I get through today? And I, a little bit at a time, found a way to survive in this body that had totally changed. And what I'm realizing as I think through all that is by the time we were thinking about having kids, I had developed so much confidence in my problem solving ability. It's not like I thought through every possible complication with a kid and knew how I would handle it, but I had worked hard enough at that point to know that I will handle it. I have handled it, and I'm incredibly resourceful and brave.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful story. Getting to that point, though, even getting approved, as you mentioned, your first daughter, you've adopted her through the foster care system, is how you call her Kay in the book. She's how old now? 9 or 10?
She's 8.
Okay,
Yeah.
so But that getting approved for foster care, being deemed fit to parent,
Mhm.
even in that temporary way, created a lot of really uncomfy scenarios. So would you tell us just a little bit about what that process entailed and how and what you had to confront?
Of course. So we had to do, now they do foster training online, but at the time you had to do it in person, and it was 24 hours of in-person classes, but the spaces weren't accessible for me. I kept getting really sick in the classes, and the rooms weren't climate controlled. And so even getting the initial training was difficult. And at one point I talked to the instructors and they said, well, if you can't come to the class, how do you think you're going to be a parent? And I thought, I don't know that there's a correlation between sitting upright for 6 hours and being a parent. I just am not positive that's necessary. But I managed to do that. I cobbled together a couple. And then the last step of the process was getting my doctor to sign off. So any foster parent has to get a doctor's note. But, for my husband who is not physically disabled, that, his doctor hardly knew who he was, but he was like, yeah, sure, whatever, of course you can be a parent. But for me, my doctor, I had been seeing him for years at that point, and he had seen me at my very worst. I had been in his office crying. He had my medical records. He knew all of the scariest parts of my condition. And so it was incredibly daunting to ask him to sign a form saying I was fit to parent. And when I went in to ask him, I was so scared. And he just asked me, oh, well, what are you planning on doing for meal prep? Or he asked me a couple like detailed questions. I answered, and they didn't feel invasive. And then he said, okay, I think a child would be very lucky to have you. And it was such a huge moment for me because it was the first time like an outside person had expressed confidence in my parenting in what I already believed to be true. And it just was a really special moment.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
So Kay comes to you, as foster parenting often happens, kind of
Mm.
last minute, like, hey, there's a baby and
Yeah.
we need you. And
Yeah.
here you go, right? You didn't have months
Hmm.
to plan for all the supplies and everything that you were going to need for a newborn. Um, so tell us about that first week with her.
I mean, it's so funny that this is how we became parents because we woke up, 12 hours later and my husband went to work the next day. This was not this like massive moment, she was 8 days old, brought her home, and then I posted on the neighborhood next door group and said, I unexpectedly have a newborn, which is a surprising thing to post. And does anyone have any supplies? And then, of course, we were living in Oakland, California. People just started dropping off all of these clothes and bottles, and it was incredible. And one of the people who replied was a night doula, or a doula who also did some night doula work. And she said, hey, this seems really special. I would be honored to come meet you all and help ease this transition. And then so Renee swooped in and she helped me set up a bottle station, just kind of helped walk me through what these early days could look like. And she offered to work a few nights for free to help us get used to being up at night. And so there were people kind of coming alongside us, but regardless, or maybe because of that, it was one of the most peaceful times of my life. I still look back on that with such gratitude. I just felt like as soon as I met Kay, yeah, I mean, I always want to cry when I think about it. I just knew her and I loved her. And I just knew that I could do it. And it was, yeah, some of the most peaceful moments of my life.
What are some of the adaptations, either that first week or as time has gone by, that you've had to make that because of your disability in order to be the kind of parent,
Mhm.
to take care of her needs?
I do everything sitting down or on the floor, but there's so many things you don't need to stand up for. Now we have a house where I can use my wheelchair at home, but at the time we didn't. And so I spread out all like bottle making supplies on the floor. I kept things clean. Her high chair was just this little floor chair, and then I would set up pillows for me to lay on while feeding her. I changed her diaper. I've always changed diapers for both my kids in bed on a portable changing pad. I don't do, there's a lot of activities of parenthood that you assume you have to stand for, but you just really don't. Just don't stand up. Just find another way to do it. And
So you
her
eat
favorite,
laying down, you do art together, you
yeah,
like it's just all kind of like reclining on the floor or on a bed or something.
yeah. And for a kid, like, kids really like lying around with their parents. Like, they don't think that is a worse situation. My 18-month-old now, his favorite spot in the house is on my wheelchair. He rides around like sitting on my lap is his throne from which he can like rule the rule the household. He adores it. And if I think about who I was before disability and the way I thought that I could do things better and better and better and better and like approach goodness and how hard I tried at that, if I apply that to parenting, I just think the first days, the first months, the first week would have been really hard and really painful because nothing is perfect then. It's all kind of just it's really slow. It's also weird and scary and boring and all sorts of things. And so I cannot imagine me at that time enjoying the first week of parenting. But I was so used to slow days. I was so used to sitting around. I was so used to a day that kind of entirely revolves around bodily functions. Like I it didn't feel like such a massive transition. I don't know. I think I'd just been training for that by taking care of my own disability.
So what's the reframing, the redirection that you'd like to see for us as a society when we think about disabled parents and maybe just disability more broadly?
I mean, I think that representation is so often referenced, but it's really critical because like in medical settings, only 2% of doctors are disabled. In social work settings, about 2% of social workers are disabled. 25% of people are disabled. And the laws continue to reflect a skewed reality when disabled people aren't present in spaces. And in order for us to be there, accessibility needs to improve. And so, I don't know, I would like challenge anyone to think, okay, today, all the places I go, which are the ones I could access in a wheelchair? For me this morning, my husband took the kids out on sort of a boring errand, but I had this precious hour to myself at a time when I normally don't. And I went to go get coffee at a new place. And so I went and I got there and yeah, I like took my wheelchair there. I was walking distance, about 15 minutes away. And there were 2 steps to go in. But then there was a sign that said there was a pull-up window or like an order window around the side. So I went around the side, but then they had put the window right behind a place where they park bikes. Other people could get around the bikes, but you had to go up steps to get around the bikes. So then I was trapped outside the bikes. And then I could see people looking at me, and that's sort of embarrassing. And then this man came out and he said, "Here, let me take care of this." And he asked me what I wanted, and he went to the order window and ordered for me. And there's a lot of back and forth because I didn't know what kind of scone I wanted. But um, and that's minor. That's minor. But it's like that everywhere. Like that's the sort of like fabric that makes up existing in public. And if I'm trying to enter a space like a professional space or that there are a lot of times that really matters that we can't get in. And I think the ripple effects of that are just so massive.
Jessica Slice is a disabled author, speaker, and essayist. Her new memoir is Unfit Parent: A Disabled Mother Challenges an Inaccessible World. You can check it out along with all her other writing at her website, jessicaslice.com. Jessica, thank you so much for sharing your story today with us.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great.
And thank you for getting uncomfy with us today. I'd love to hear about your experience with perfection or realizing that you can't be perfect and that maybe that's better than what you had envisioned. Send an email to uncomfy@byu.edu or find me on Instagram. We are at uncomfy.podcast to continue the conversation. Uncomfy is a BYU radio podcast. Samuel Benson produces it, and the team includes Hyobin Kim and Sam Payne. Our theme music was composed by Kelsey Ney. I'm Julie Rose. Can't wait to get uncomfy with you again next week. If you're like me, sometimes you just need a fresh voice in your podcast listening queue to shake things up a bit. And that's why I'm here to recommend The Lisa Show from BYU Radio. It's hosted by Lisa Valentine Clark. She's a widowed mother of 5. She's an actress and comedian, and she knows that real life is messy, but she's here to say you're not alone. Each episode of The Lisa Show explores the everyday struggles we all face, like struggles in parenting, mental health, relationships, social issues, all while also unpacking how to live a happier, healthier life. So catch the Lisa Show from BYU Radio on the BYU Radio app or on any podcast listening app. New episodes drop every Tuesday.